Imagine standing on the creaking deck of a galleon at dawn. The sea is still, a sheet of glass, but your stomach is tied in knots because the silence won't last. Across the horizon, black sails, rise pirates, hungry wolves who smell silver in your hold. The captain shouts orders, men scramble, and your heart thunders louder than the waves. You glance at the gun's iron monsters crouching along the rails, their bronze mouths already smoking as powder boys race with cartridges. You know that when the order is given, the world will split open in fire and thunder. That was the true terror of the age of sail knot, the pirates themselves, not the navies that hunted them, but the galleon's guns. Those cannons were more than weapons. They were reputations forged in iron. One broadside could turn an unknown captain into a legend whispered in taverns from Havana to Manila. And one misfire, one split second of hesitation, could sink a fleet and stain a name forever. Pirate kings and privateer queens all knew the same truth. The sea doesn't respect crowns, but it bows to firepower. Blackbeard wasn't feared for his beard, it was the thunder of his cannon-laden queen, Anne's revenge that made men surrender without a fight. The Spanish treasure fleets weren't envied because they carried gold, they were envied because they had the guns to keep it, until someone braver came to take it. And yet, the guns were more than steel. They had personalities, curses, tempers. Some captains named their cannons as if they were lovers. Others treated them as priests, baptizing them with rum before battle. And still others swore their guns whispered to them in storms, promising glory or ruin. The seas of the Golden Age ran red, not with swords, but with iron shot screaming across waves, smashing hulls, and filling decks with splinters sharper than daggers. And the captains who mastered the art of the broadside, they weren't just seafarers. They were kings of thunder, queens of fire, gods for the heartbeat of a battle. But one question remains: what happens when the very firepower that makes you famous becomes the curse that drags you to the deep? The answer lies in the tale of one galleon whose guns rewrote history both for its captain and for the men and women who dared to face it. The morning fog lay thick over the Caribbean, rolling low across the swells as though the sea itself wished to hide what was coming. Aboard the Spanish galleon San Domingo, Captain Rodrigo de Alva stood at the prow, his hands clasped tight behind his back, eyes narrowed against the haze. The San Domingo was a fortress of oak and iron, her hull swollen with silver from the mines of New Spain, her hold stacked with enough treasure to ransom a kingdom. But Rodrigo knew treasure was both shield and curse drew wolves from the shadows. And wolves had teeth of iron, Captain. A lookout shouted from the rigging. Sails to the east. The fog parted like a curtain, and there they were, black sails rising against the pale sky, as if night itself had come to swallow the dawn. The men froze, whispering the name that travelled like plague through every tavern. Il Tiburon Negro, the Black Shark, a pirate galleon, infamous, notorious, and laden with more guns than any ship had right to carry. Its captain was a man known only as Morales, a figure half in shadow, said to have once been a Spanish officer who turned on his own crown after a betrayal. Some claimed he was cursed, that his ship's guns never missed, that every cannonball found its mark as if guided by the devil's hand. Rodrigo's jaw tightened. He barked orders, his voice cutting through fear like a whip. Powder monkeys sprinted below to bring charges. Gunners swabbed and primed the great bronze culverins, their surfaces dark with smoke scars from a dozen battles. Sailors hauled lines, adjusting canvas to catch the wind. The deck became a storm of motion, every man moving with the desperate urgency of those who knew survival lay in thunder. The fog lifted, and the black shark closed the distance, her hull sleek, her decks bristling with cannon. Rodrigo felt the air shift, a tense silence before the first roar. Then, with a flash of flame, the pirate galleon spat fire. The first broadside screamed across the water, iron shot crashing into the San Domingo's hull. Splinters flew like daggers, tearing men apart, the deck exploding in chaos. The galleon groaned as if alive, her timbers shrieking. Rodrigo staggered but stood firm. "Return fire," he thundered. The San Domingo answered with her own guns, a chorus of booms that shook the sea. Flame and smoke erupted, iron balls slamming into the black shark, smashing railings, shattering masts. For a heartbeat, Rodrigo thought they might turn the tide. But then he saw the pirate gunners, reloading faster than humanly possible, their movements disciplined, relentless. The black shark's cannons roared again and again, each shot striking true, as though the guns themselves hungered for Spanish blood. The battle became thunder made flesh. The sea churned, black smoke rolling across waves, fire licking the sails. Men screamed, prayed, and bled as iron rained down. Rodrigo gripped the rail, his knuckles white, his ears ringing with the relentless chorus of destruction. He had fought pirates before, but never like this. The black shark's guns did not miss. They did not falter. They sang with unnatural precision, a dirge for the doomed. As dusk bled into night, the San Domingo burned. Her guns, once proud and fierce, fell silent one by one, their crews dead or broken. Rodrigo, bloodied but unbowed, raised his sword toward the pirate galleon. "We are not done yet," he roared, though his men barely stood. Across the water, the black shark loomed, her silhouette monstrous against the dying light. And upon her deck, Captain Morale stood at the prow, cloaked in smoke, his hand resting lovingly on the nearest cannon as though it were a loyal beast. His voice carried across the waves, low and cold. "Surrender the silver, Rodrigo, or I will let my children sing again." Rodrigo stared across the water, heart pounding. Were those guns merely iron and powder, or something else? Something unholy? The deck trembled beneath him as another cannon roared, tearing through the hull. The sea poured in. The San Domingo was dying. And Rodrigo knew, with a chill that froze his soul, that fame on these seas was not born of courage alone. It was born of the guns of a galleon. Long before the black shark thundered across the Caribbean, before Morales's name struck fear in ports from Havana to Cartagena, there was another tale one whispered in foundries, in taverns, and by gunners who crossed themselves before touching cold iron. It was said the cannons of the black shark were not forged by human hands alone. They were born in fire, touched by something older, something darker. And to understand the terror they spread, you must first understand the man who carried them, the fallen son of Spain. Diego Morales was not always a pirate. He had once been a commander in the Spanish Navy, a man of honor, discipline, and ambition. Born in Cadiz to a family of merchants, he grew up by the smell of tar and salt, watching galleons glide out toward the new world. He dreamed not of trade, but of command, and through iron will and ruthless intelligence, he earned it. By 30, he was a decorated captain, his ship, Nuestra Señora del Pilar, feared by corsairs, but honor and Spain seldom walked hand in hand. During an ill-fated mission escorting a treasure fleet, Morales's ship was sacrificed by corrupt officials who had struck a secret bargain with smugglers. Left to die in a storm of pirate fire, half his crew slaughtered, Morales barely survived, clinging to wreckage for 3 days before washing ashore in Jamaica. There, sunburned and delirious, he swore to the sea and to God that he would never again serve a crown that betrayed its sons. His vengeance would not be against pirates or nations. It would be against everyone. When he returned to the Caribbean months later, it was not as a captain in uniform, but as a shadow, and with him, he brought guns unlike any the sea had ever heard. The legend of their forging varies with every telling, but the core is the same. Morales vanished into the hills of Hispaniola, where runaway slaves and deserters whispered of an ancient blacksmith who could call fire from the earth itself. Some said he was an African Hungan, a priest of spirits who had fled across the ocean with chains still around his ankles. Others claimed he was no man at all, but a devil wearing skin, hammering iron in caves where the walls glowed red. Morales found him, more was found by him. For weeks, Morales was gone. When he emerged, he bore 12 cannons of bronze and iron, their surfaces carved with symbols no sailor could read, their barrels polished black as obsidian. He called them his children. He named each one La Llorona, Sangre del Sol, El Martillo, Misericordia. To touch them was to feel a hum like the pulse of a heartbeat. To fire them was to hear a scream beneath the thunder, as though the iron itself rejoiced in destruction. The first ship to face them was a Portuguese frigate off the coast of Santo Domingo. Witnesses claimed Morales fired a single broadside, and every shot struck the same line of the hull, snapping the ship's spine in two. Survivors swore they saw flame erupt from the sea itself, swallowing their comrades. From that day, rumors spread that the Black Shark was cursed, its guns guided by spirits of the drowned. By the time Morales fully armed his galleon and christened her La Sombra del Mar, the shadow of the sea, the Caribbean trembled. Pirates flocked to his banner, drawn not by loyalty, but by the certainty that with those guns, victory was inevitable. And Morales, once a man of laws, became their Iron King. But power breeds paranoia. Morales trusted his guns more than he trusted men. He would stand on deck in the dead of night, stroking the bronze muzzles as one might stroke a hunting hound. "You do not lie," he whispered. "You do not betray." His crew grew uneasy, muttering prayers when he passed. Some swore they saw him bleeding onto the barrels, feeding them as if they demanded sacrifice. Yet none dared defy him, because when Morales gave the order, his children sang, and no enemy ship survived the chorus. It was not long before Morales's reputation eclipsed his origins. No one cared any more that he had once been a Spanish officer. To the sailors of the Caribbean, he was something else entirely, part man, part curse, a captain who commanded thunder. His name alone emptied ports, his sails scattered convoys. His shadow choked trade routes, and yet, with every victory, the whispers deepened. Some said Morales had bound his soul to the cannons, that when they roared, part of his spirit left his body, guiding the iron shot to its target. Others whispered that he had bargained not with God, but with something beneath the sea force that demanded more than gold in exchange for such unerring power. The sea, after all, never gives without taking. The truth came to light, perhaps deeper into shadow, during a raid on a Dutch East Indiaman. The merchant vessel was armed, its captain brave, and for the first time, Morales hesitated. The cannons fired, but one misfired, exploding and killing 2 of his men. The crew gasped. The curse had faltered. Morales did not flinch. He strode to the ruined cannon, placed his bleeding hand on the twisted iron, and whispered something no one could hear. Then he ordered the broadside again. The next volley tore the Dutchman apart in a single roar, killing all aboard. The broken cannon, however, was gone the next morning, vanished from the deck as if it had never existed. From then on, the crew never asked how the guns worked. They simply obeyed, terrified of what price was being paid. And Morales, once a man betrayed by kings, became a king of thunder in his own right. But the curse of firepower is simple. The louder it roars, the more it hungers. Morales's raids grew bloodier, his demands more reckless. He attacked Spanish treasure fleets, not only for silver but for glory, to test his children's voices against the largest targets. He battled Portuguese squadrons head-on, laughing as his cannons tore frigates to splinters. And with each battle, his name grew, but so did the shadows under his eyes. The hollow look of a man who no longer knew where he ended and his guns began. One night, during a feast after a great victory, a young pirate dared to ask him, "Captain, what happens if one day your children turn against you?" The room froze. Morales smiled thinly, his teeth red from wine. "Then," he said, stroking the nearest cannon, "they will not turn against me alone. They will turn against all of you." The laughter that followed was hollow, uneasy, a sound that echoed longer than it should have. And so the legend of Morales and his guns spread not as a tale of fortune, but as a warning. For in the Caribbean, captains were made famous by cunning, by cruelty, by gold. But Morales was made famous by firepower, and firepower has no loyalty. It devours captain and crew alike. The tale of the San Domingo would prove this truth, as Rodrigo de Alva had already begun to learn. The cannons did not simply win battles. They chose their moments, their victims, as if some dark force delighted in weaving history through blood and smoke. And now, with every shot that struck true, Rodrigo felt a greater question claw at his heart. Was he facing a man or a legend born from the sea's oldest curse? Because if the guns of the Black Shark could not miss, then perhaps they were not aimed by Morales's hand at all, but by something that had been waiting in the deep since the first ship dared to sail. And if that were true, then no fleet, no galleon, no captain on earth was safe. The wreck of the San Domingo drifted half-submerged in the waters of the Caribbean. Her once-proud hull shattered, her sails torn like burial shrouds. Rodrigo de Alva had survived, but only barely. Carried by wreckage, he was pulled from the sea by fishermen days later. His body battered, his pride in ruins, his heart boiling with vengeance. He had faced many dangers in his years at sea, storms and corsairs, hunger and mutiny, but never had he seen anything like the Black Shark. The memory of those guns haunted him, each shot unerring, each broadside like the judgment of God. They had not simply destroyed his ship, they had humiliated him. Worse, they had left him alive, and that, Rodrigo swore, would be Morales's greatest mistake in Havana as he healed. Whispers spread that Rodrigo had seen the Devil's Galleon with his own eyes and lived to tell of it. He told officials of Morales, of the cursed cannons that could not miss, but the governors only laughed uneasily. "All pirates seem invincible until they hang," one muttered, though his fingers twitched nervously at the mention of the Black Shark. To them, Rodrigo's testimony was half a sailor's tale, half excuse for defeat. But Rodrigo cared little for their doubt. He had seen the truth, and he intended to answer thunder with thunder, for months. He worked the docks and taverns, seeking gunners, smiths, and shipwrights bold enough to dream of a galleon that might stand against Morales's cursed fleet. He found them outcasts, veterans, and men hungry for silver or vengeance. Together, they began to forge their answer, a Spanish galleon not for treasure but for war. Her hull was reinforced, her gun decks widened to hold more culverins than most ships could bear. She was christened Santa Tormenta, the Holy Storm. Rodrigo called her not a ship but a cathedral of fire, and at her heart were her guns, not cursed like Morales's, not carved with strange symbols, but perfected by mortal hands. A master blacksmith named Esteban, once disgraced for heresy, forged barrels longer, stronger, more balanced than any standard naval cannon. He swore no spirit touched them, only sweat and steel. But when Rodrigo tested them, firing broadside into the empty sea, the sound shook the bay and echoed like a storm rolling across mountains. Sailors on the docks crossed themselves, swearing the guns themselves, growled with hunger. Rodrigo's crew became zealots to his cause. They drilled day and night, hauling powder, loading, swabbing, firing, until their hands blistered and bled. Rodrigo demanded perfection. Morales's guns may not miss, he told them, but ours will not falter. We may bleed, but we will not bow. His men grew lean and hard, their eyes burning with purpose. Word spread across the Caribbean of the Santa Tormenta. Pirates mocked it at first, calling it a desperate Spaniard's folly. But slowly, whispers grew that perhaps this ship was different. Some claimed Rodrigo's gunners could reload faster than any crew alive, that their broadsides thundered in unison like rolling drums of war. Others said Rodrigo himself had gone mad, that he prayed not to God but to the guns themselves, baptizing them with oil and wine. It was only a matter of time before the Black Shark came to test the rumor. The duel was inevitable. The Black Shark, swollen with silver plundered from a Portuguese fleet, was sighted off the Yucatan coast. Rodrigo, hearing the news, set sail at once. His crew stood tense but eager, every man whispering prayers, every hand ready at the guns. The sea was calm, the sky painted with streaks of scarlet as dusk fell. When at last they saw it, black sails against the horizon, cutting through the waves like a blade, the two ships closed with steady inevitability, like predators drawn by the scent of blood. On the deck of the Black Shark, Morales stood at the prow, his hand caressing the barrel of La Llorona, his favorite cannon. On the Santa Tormenta, Rodrigo raised his sword to the heavens, his voice carrying over the waves. Tonight we silence the devil's thunder. The first broadside came from the Black Shark. Smoke and fire erupted, cannonballs screaming through the air. But Rodrigo had anticipated it. Down. He roared, and his men dropped as the shot tore across the deck, smashing railings, splintering wood. Yet only half struck true. The rest splashed harmlessly into the sea. For the first time, Morales's children faltered. A murmur rippled through both crews. Rodrigo seized the moment. Answer them, the Santa Tormenta bellowed. 30 guns fired as one, the broadside cracking the sea itself. Irons smashed into the Black Shark, shattering her foremast, tearing holes through her gun deck. Smoke engulfed both ships, the acrid stench of powder choking the air. Men screamed, wood cracked, and the duel of thunder began. For hours, the ships circled, trading broadsides that lit the night like lightning. Morales shouted to his crew, his eyes wild, demanding more powder, more fire. Rodrigo moved among his gunners, steady and sharp, encouraging, correcting, pushing them past exhaustion. The sea boiled with smoke, fire, and blood at one moment. The Black Shark's cannons found their mark, ripping into the Santa Tormenta's hull. Men were thrown like ragdolls, their bodies broken. Rodrigo staggered, blood streaming down his face, but he would not fall. "Reload," he roared. "Do not stop. Our thunder is stronger." Another broadside, and another. The decks became slaughterhouses, strewn with splinters, blood, and shattered iron. Morales's eyes burned with fury, his lips moving as though whispering to his guns, pleading with them, commanding them. But Rodrigo's fire was relentless. The Santa Tormenta's broadsides came faster, louder, more precise. Each volley shook the Black Shark, like a hammer striking an anvil. And then came the moment that changed everything in the chaos. As Rodrigo raised his sword to order the final broadside, lightning split the sky. For an instant the night turned white, and in the glare Rodrigo saw it. The cannons of the Black Shark, glowing faintly, as though lit from within by fire not of this world. Morales's hand bled freely as he pressed it to one barrel, his face twisted in a grimace of pain and ecstasy. The guns roared and three struck home, killing dozens. But the fourth exploded, shattering into molten fragments, tearing Morales's men apart. The crew of the Santa Tormenta howled in triumph. Rodrigo's voice rose above them all. "Now, finish it." The final broadside thundered. The Black Shark shuddered, her hull cracking, her sails collapsing in flame. Morales stood on the deck amid smoke and ruin, his cloak ablaze, his eyes locked on Rodrigo across the water. He raised his hand in defiance, even as the sea swallowed his ship. "This is not the end," his voice carried, impossibly loud. "The children are not mine alone. They will sing again." And then the Black Shark slipped beneath the waves, her cursed guns vanishing into the deep. Rodrigo fell to his knees, exhausted, bloodied, but victorious. His crew roared around him, their voices echoing across the night. The Black Shark was gone. Morales was gone. The devil's thunder silenced at last, or so they thought, because in the quiet that followed, when the smoke drifted away and the stars returned, Rodrigo swore he heard it the faintest sound, deep beneath the waves. Not the groan of sinking timber, not the cry of dying men, but a whisper like iron grinding on iron, like cannons priming in the dark, and his heart went cold as the sea. The Caribbean celebrated. In Havana's taverns, sailors shouted themselves, hoarse retelling the tale of the great duel. Rodrigo de Alva, once mocked as a broken captain, had destroyed Morales and sunk the Black Shark ill. "Tiburon Negro is no more," they cried, banging mugs on tables, spilling rum in rivers. The governors toasted him as a hero, the crown whispered of honors, and merchants prayed to his name. For their galleons might now sail without fear of Morales's shadow. But Rodrigo could not celebrate. He had seen the look in Morales's eyes as the Black Shark sank, had heard the voice that echoed across the water. And most of all, he could not shake the sound he swore had followed the faint groan of cannons beneath the waves. At night he dreamt of it, iron wheels turning, gunpowder hissing, as though the sea itself had not claimed those weapons, but was keeping them alive. Months passed. Rodrigo remained restless. He drilled his crew aboard the Santa Tormenta, patching her scars from the duel. They followed him loyally, but in whispers they admitted the same unease. "The Black Shark is gone," they told each other, But why do the winds still feel heavy? Even in calm waters, the men felt watched. Even in empty seas, they felt hunted. Then, in the spring of 1712, rumors began to drift into Havana like smoke on the breeze. Off the coast of Cartagena, a French merchantman claimed it had been attacked by a ship it swore was the Black Shark. Off Jamaica, a fisherman returned wide-eyed, insisting he'd seen black sails in the moonlight, heard thunder in the distance, though no storm blew. And from Curacao came the most chilling, a Dutch frigate, its hull shredded, limped into port. Its captain, half mad with fear, declared he had fought the Black Shark for 3 hours, before it vanished into a fog thicker than tardot. The governors laughed off the tales. Sailors' ghosts, they said, born of rum and fear. But Rodrigo listened, and his blood turned to ice. For in each story the same detail returned, the cannons. They did not fire like ordinary guns. They sang, one broadside tearing ships apart with impossible precision. And the survivors whispered they could hear something in the roarer cry, like voices of the drowned rising in chorus. Rodrigo knew then that Morales's words had been no empty boast. The children are not mine alone. They will sing again. Driven by dread and duty, he set sail to find the truth. The Santa Tormenta scoured the waters where Morales had sunk, her crew uneasy, their prayers louder with each mile. They found wreckage, yes, splintered timbers, floating barrels, the occasional corpse, but no galleon, no guns. It was as though the sea had swallowed them whole. One evening, as twilight bled into storm clouds, Rodrigo stood alone at the rail, scanning the horizon. Lightning split the sky, and for an instant he swore he saw them 12 faint glimmers beneath the waves, like lanterns glowing deep in the black water. He blinked, and they were gone. But his heart knew the truth. The guns were not resting. They were waiting. The curse did not sleep long. Weeks later, off Trinidad, Rodrigo intercepted a Spanish trader under distress. Its sails were in tatters, its deck blasted, its captain pale with shock. It was no pirate we faced, the man gasped. It was death itself. A galleon, dark as night, guns glowing like embers. She fired once, and half my men died where they stood. Rodrigo pressed him for details, but the man only shook, muttering prayers. Yet when Rodrigo inspected the shot lodged in the trader's hull, his blood ran cold. The cannonball was etched with markings fringe, twisting symbols identical to those he had seen carved into Morales's cursed children. The Black Shark was gone, but the guns had found another host. The truth emerged slowly. A rogue English captain named Jonathan Harker, once disgraced for mutiny, had dredged the wreck of Morales's ship with a band of scavengers. They hauled the cannons from the deep, prying them from the sea's grip with chains and pulleys, whispering of treasure too powerful to abandon. By the time Rodrigo learned this, it was too late. Harker had mounted the guns aboard his frigate, christening her the Revenant. And from the first shot, the curse took hold. The Revenant carved a trail of fire across the Caribbean. Unlike Morales, Harker cared nothing for terror or reputation. He wanted only plunder, and the guns gave it to him. Every broadside was slaughter, every raid merciless. Spanish convoys burned, Portuguese forts crumbled, even the English themselves lost ships to his greed. And everywhere he went, survivors whispered of the guns, how they fired faster, truer, louder than any mortal iron. Rodrigo's fury was matched only by dread. Morales had been a warrior, bound by some twisted sense of command. But Harker, Harker was chaos given teeth. If the curse had truly chosen him, then the Caribbean would drown in thunder. One night, as the Santa Tormenta lay anchored off Barbados, Rodrigo gathered his officers. Rain pelted the deck, lightning strobed the sea. He unrolled maps, his voice sharp. We face not a man, but a legacy. The cannons are not weapons, they are a disease. Morales wielded them, but Harker spreads them like plague. We must end it now. If the children of thunder are allowed to sing unchecked, no empire will stand. His first mate, Ruiz, swallowed hard. Captain, how can we fight such iron? They do not miss. They do not falter. Rodrigo's gaze was grim. Then we find their weakness. No curse is eternal. If they came from the sea, then to the sea we must return them. But even as he spoke, thunder rolled not from the sky, but from the horizon. The Revenant had found them. Black sails loomed through the rain, guns already glowing in their ports. Harker's laughter, wild and cruel, carried across the storm. Rodrigo, the sea failed to drown me. Shall we let the children sing for you now? The first broadside roared, and the night exploded. Iron tore through the waves, smashing into the Santa Tormenta. Men screamed, wood shattered, the mast cracked. Rodrigo bellowed for return fire, and his guns answered, flames splitting the storm. The sea boiled between them as the duel began. Rodrigo's disciplined broadsides against the unnatural fury of the Revenant. But even as the cannons roared, Rodrigo saw it again, that glow, that hum, as though the iron itself was alive. Morales had been right. The guns had never belonged to him. They belonged to something deeper, something older, something that fed on rage and fire. And now, through Harker, they hungered more than ever. The battle raged until dawn. Thunder drowning thunder, fire tearing the sky. Rodrigo's ship staggered but held. The Revenant bled fire but refused to fall. And as the sun rose blood-red over the smoking sea, one truth burned in Rodrigo's mind. This was not a victory to be won by cannon or crew. This was a war against the curse itself, a curse that would outlive captains, crowns, and empires unless he could find the way to silence it forever. Rodrigo de Alva had always thought of guns as tools, iron tubes, powder, and discipline. They were nothing mystical, at least. That's what he told himself. But after his duel with Morales, after hearing the groan of thunder beneath the sea, and now, after facing Jonathan Harker's Revenant and its impossible fire, he could no longer deny the truth. These cannons were no tools. They were something else, something born not only of iron and fire, but of whispers older than Spain, older than empires. The Santa Tormenta limped into San Juan, battered and broken. Her masts were splintered, her decks scarred, and her crew haunted. Men who had once roared defiance now sat in silence, staring at the sea as though expecting it to speak back. Rodrigo himself bore wounds from shot and splinters, but the deeper wound was in his soul. He could not shake the image of Harker, laughing wildly as the glowing cannons spat ruin, or of Morales's last words, "They will sing again." Rodrigo's officers urged him to refit, to strike back at the Revenant before Harker spread further terror. But Rodrigo hesitated. Each battle left more dead, and each time the cursed guns only seemed to grow hungrier. He began to wonder if force alone could never defeat them. To silence thunder, he would need to understand its source. And so, while his ship was patched, he sought knowledge. He prowled libraries in crumbling monasteries, bribed friars for forbidden texts, paid smugglers for maps drawn in blood. He drank with old gunners, pressed freed slaves for tales of the islands, listened to shamans who spoke of spirits bound in iron. Each story was different, but threads connected. A forge hidden in the volcanic heart of Hispaniola. An African blacksmith who had crossed in chains, his gods traveling with him. A pact of fire and blood, binding spirits of the drowned into molten metal. One tale chilled him most. An elder in Port-au-Prince, her hair white as sea foam, whispered that the guns had been birthed not by one man, but by many. Each barrel had drunk a life before it was finished, sacrifice hammered into iron. That was why they sang. The voices of the damned were trapped within, screaming for release. Break them, and the sea takes you, she warned. Keep them, and they take your soul. Rodrigo left her trembling. If it was true, then Morales had not commanded his guns, they had commanded him. And now they whispered through Harker. If the curse fed on captains, then perhaps Rodrigo himself was its next chosen mouthpiece. The search for proof led him into the belly of Hispaniola. Guided by maps half-burned and rumors older than empire, Rodrigo and a band of loyal men trekked into the mountains. Steam hissed from the earth, rivers ran warm, and the stench of sulfur thickened the air. At last they found it, a cave where the walls glowed red and the floor shimmered with molten stone. In its heart stood the remnants of a forjan anvil blackened with centuries, hammerheads cracked, chains scattered like bones, and carved above the arch, in letters neither Spanish nor African nor any tongue Rodrigo knew, were symbols identical to those etched on the cursed cannonballs. The men refused to enter. They crossed themselves, muttering prayers. Rodrigo, however, stepped inside, his boots ringing on the stone. The forge was long cold, yet he felt heat prickling his skin as though invisible flames licked at him. He touched the anvil, and a low hum filled his skull. His vision blurred on in that instant. He saw it. A memory not his own. Men bound in chains, their eyes wild with terror as molten metal poured over their flesh. A hammer falling in rhythm to their screams. A blacksmith with skin like midnight and eyes like coals, chanting in a tongue older than empire. With each strike, souls were beaten into iron. Cannons took shape, their mouths yawning like beasts, their sides glowing with runes of bondage. When the final one cooled, the blacksmith cut his palm and pressed it to the barrel, sealing it with his blood. Now you will never miss, a voice rumbled in Rodrigo's mind. Now you will always hunger. Rodrigo staggered back, gasping. His men rushed to steady him, but he pushed them away. His face was pale, his eyes wide with dread. He had seen enough. The curse was not just legend. It was real, forged in fire and sacrifice. And it would not end until the children were silenced in the same fire that birthed them. But how could one silence iron that sang with souls? Back aboard the Santa Tormenta, Rodrigo shared nothing of what he had seen. He could not bear to spread the terror further. Instead, he gave orders to hunt Harker. Though his heart knew the truth, he was not hunting a man, but the echo of a forge. Harker, meanwhile, revelled in his new kingdom of thunder. The revenant grew fat with plunder, its black sails haunting every coast. Spanish, Portuguese, Dutch, even English ships fell to its guns. Harker's cruelty surpassed Morales's. Survivors were few, left only to spread tales of the cursed Galleon. He drank by firelight, boasting of how his children sang for him, laughing when his men crossed themselves in fear. He was not a captain, but a prophet of iron. and the Caribbean quaked beneath his reign. Rodrigo knew time was running short. He needed an edge, and so he turned to the unthinkable, seeking counsel from those who trafficked in curses. In Jamaica, he found a maroon priestess, her skin scarred with ritual marks, her eyes white as clouds. She listened silently as he spoke of the guns, of morels, of Harker. When he finished, she shook her head slowly. "You cannot kill thunder with thunder," she said. "The children were forged with blood, and with blood they must be silenced. The sea claims all. Return them to the fire of the earth, and perhaps the voices will rest. But beware, Spaniardian remembers its master. The guns may choose you next." Her words gnawed at him. Each night, as the Santa Tormenta sailed, Rodrigo found himself pacing the decks, staring at his own cannons. He began to feel a pull in his chest, a whisper in his ear. Not from his guns, but from the ones beneath the waves. Sometimes, in the distance, he swore he heard a faint echo, like thunder rolling far away. And once, just once, he thought he heard his own name in the rumble. When the Revenant struck again, this time annihilating a Spanish convoy near Cuba, Rodrigo knew the endgame had arrived. He gathered his men. His face was grim, his voice steady, but his eyes carried a shadow. "We do not fight for gold," he told them. "We fight to silence a curse that will drown these seas forever. Tonight we hunt the Revenant, and if we fall as the last defense against thunder itself." His crew, weary but loyal, roared in answer. The hunt began, and as the Santa Tormenta carved her path through the dark waters, Rodrigo stood alone at the prow, staring into the endless horizon. The guns of the Revenant were waiting. The forge of Hispaniola had shown him their birth. But what it had not shown him was the ending. Would he silence them all? Would he become their next voice? In the stillness of the night, the sea whispered back, low and cold. "The children are waiting, Rodrigo. The children are hungry." The sea was quiet that night, too quiet. A pale moon hung over the Caribbean, silver light rippling across black water like the sheen of a drawn blade. On the deck of the Santa Tormenta, Rodrigo de Alva stood at the prow, his hands tight on the rail, his face carved from shadow and resolve. Behind him, his crew moved in silence, as though afraid their very breath might rouse the storm waiting in the distance. Every man knew this would be their final voyage. For weeks, they had hunted the Revenant. From Cuba to Tortuga, from the Caymans to the Virgin Islands, they followed the trail of wreckage left in Jonathan Harker's wake. Each sighting was worse than the last villages shelled to splinters. Convoys sunk without mercy, even Spanish forts reduced to rubble by the cursed children of thunder. And in every survivor's tale, Rodrigo heard the same refrain. The cannons sang, louder and louder, as though the sea itself was their choir. Now, at last, the hunt was ending. Scouts had spotted the Revenant in the Mona Passage, its black sails blotting out the stars. Rodrigo gave the order, "Intercept." His ship was patched, his crew weary but hardened, and his heart grim with knowledge. He knew what the guns were. He knew what they wanted. And tonight he intended to silence them forever, even if it meant his own life. The hours crawled. Then, at dawn, the horizon darkened. Out of the mist, the Revenant emerged, a shadow crowned with fire. Her sails were torn yet defiant, her hull scarred but proud, and her guns glowing faintly as though stoked from within. At her prow stood Harker, bare-chested, hair wild, a bottle in one hand and a cutlass in the other. He roared across the water, his voice carrying like thunder, Rodrigo. You survived the shark, now face the revenant. Let the children sing your requiem. Rodrigo raised his sword, voice steady. This ends tonight, Harker. You'll not leave this sea alive. The first broadside split the morning. Fire erupted from the revenant, cannonballs screaming through the air. The Santa Tormenta shook under the impact, her timbers groaning, men thrown to the deck. Blood spilled, smoke filled the air, but Rodrigo bellowed back, answered them. His guns roared, iron smashing into the revenant's side. The duel began. For hours they circled, two beasts tearing at each other, trading thunder until the sea boiled with smoke and flame. Men screamed, wood splintered, powder ignited in bursts of fury. Rodrigo stalked the deck like a man possessed, urging his gunners to reload faster, fire truer. Harker laughed through the carnage, drunk on destruction, as his cursed cannons spat ruin with terrifying accuracy. But something was changing. Rodrigo saw it in the guns themselves. Each shot from the revenant made them glow brighter, their runes burning crimson, their roar not just iron but voices, hundreds, thousands, screaming in unison. His men flinched each time, clutching their ears, swearing they heard names in the Thunder Brothers, fathers, wives, lost to the sea. The cannons were no longer weapons. They were a choir of the damned, demanding to be heard. Rodrigo's blood ran cold. If he did not end it now, the curse would consume not just Harker, but the entire Caribbean. Hard to starboard, he roared. The Santa Tormenta swung, cutting dangerously close to the revenant. The ships collided, timbers cracking, grappling hooks flying. Men screamed as boarding planks dropped, steel clashing as crews spilled onto each other's decks. The duel of thunder became a storm of steel. Rodrigo cut his way through the chaos, blade flashing, blood spraying. Around him, his men fought like lions, but the cursed fire of the revenant made demons of Harker's crew. Their eyes were wild, their faces twisted, as though the guns themselves whispered madness into their ears, and at the heart of it all stood Harker, beside his glowing cannons, laughing like a mad god. Do you hear them, Rodrigo? He roared. Do you hear their song? They chose me. The sea itself bows to me. He slammed his bleeding hand against a cannon's barrel, and the iron screamed in answer, glowing brighter. The next shot tore through 3 decks of the Santa Tormenta, splitting men like kindling. Rodrigo staggered, coughing blood, but forced himself forward. They don't bow to you, Harker, he shouted. They consume you. Steel met steel. Their blades clashed, sparks flying, the roar of guns their backdrop. Harker was strong, drunk on madness and fire, his strikes wild but powerful. Rodrigo was steadier, each movement disciplined, each thrust measured. Back and forth they fought, the deck shaking beneath them, until at last Rodrigo knocked Harker's blade aside and drove him back against the glowing cannons. The iron throbbed beneath them, the runes burning bright as suns. Rodrigo felt their pull, whispering in his skull, begging him to claim them. Touch us, Rodrigo. Command us. Let us sing for you. For an instant, his hand trembled. He saw visions, the Santa Tormenta, unstoppable, fleets burning before him, empires bowing to his thunder. With the guns, he could be more than captain. He could be legend. But then he remembered Morales's eyes. He remembered the forge in Hispaniola, the chained men screaming as they were beaten into iron, and he knew the guns were not power, they were prison. With a roar, Rodrigo shoved Harker backward. The mad captain stumbled, arms flailing, then fell across the glowing barrels. For a heartbeat the cannons screamed louder than ever, their runes flaring so bright the sea itself seemed to shudder. Harker's body convulsed, his mouth open in a final, endless laugh. Then, with a crack like mountains breaking, the cannons exploded. Fire consumed the deck. Men were hurled screaming into the sea. The Revenant split in two, timbers tearing apart as cursed iron shattered into shards that hissed into the water. Rodrigo was thrown hard against the rail, his vision white, his ears ringing with the death cry of thunder. When he came to, he was clinging to wreckage, the sea around him boiling with fire and corpses. The Santa Tormenta was gone, the Revenant broken, and the cursed cannons vanished into the deep once more. The dawn sky was blood-red, the air filled with smoke and silence. Rodrigo coughed, tasting salt and blood. He looked to the horizon, half expecting to hear the guns again, but all was still. For the first time in years, the Caribbean knew quiet, and yet, as he drifted, half-conscious, he thought he heard something far below. A faint rumble. Not as loud as before, not yet but present, waiting. Like thunder before a storm, the children had been silenced. But had they been destroyed? Or merely returned to their cradle in the sea, waiting for another hand to raise them? Rodrigo closed his eyes, praying it was the former. But in his heart, he feared it was the latter. Rodrigo de Alva was never seen again. Some say he drifted to shore half dead, and lived out his days in silence, a broken man who refused ever to set foot on a ship. Others insist he drowned with the Santa Tormenta, his bones now resting among the very guns he sought to destroy. The Spanish crown struck his name from records, unwilling to admit that empires had been threatened by iron that defied God himself. But sailors talk, and sailors remember in the years that followed, ships vanished in calm seas, their timbers later washing ashore, scorched black as though touched by fire. Fishermen swore that in the Mona Passage, on nights when lightning split the horizon, you could hear it the sound of thunder rolling from below, not above. And once, in 1723, a Dutch trader limped into port with its hull torn open by a single cannonball. A cannonball carved with runes no smith would claim. Had the children of thunder been silenced, or had they simply returned to their cradle in the deep, waiting for a new master? The sea does not forget. The sea does not forgive. And somewhere in the black waters of the Caribbean, a whisper lingers still. The guns are hungry.